All right. Good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third class series. I can't believe we've done this 3 weeks in a row now, but somehow we made it work. It's always crazy that there's always something to brief you on every week. I just want to congratulate the recurring people who come back week after week for this class. And to the people who are watching online, thank you. Your questions are always welcome, even our fans and our haters, because we have some people in the stream, as you can see here, who think LaRouche is cringe. So, next time I'm only going to put up the super chat so that anybody who pays can put up how much they love LaRouche or hate LaRouche. But so I think some people know about the FBI raid on Scott Ritter. I think the fact that they were accusing him of violating the FARA Act, that he did not register as a foreign agent. And, oh, wait, I can get rid of that because we're already live. And the fact that he did not register as a foreign agent because he was getting paid by foreign outlets to write articles. And he said the reason he didn't register as a foreign agent is because he's an American and he's a patriot. And it is his responsibility to inform the public as to the injustices of the government. And he gave a rousing kind of defense today on the IPC call. So for those of you who don't know, we have an International Peace Coalition call every Friday at 11 in the morning. Today there were about over 350 people from however many nations on, and they were all listening to people like Scott Ritter, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and Ray McGovern, and Jonathan Kutav, who is the director and I think the founder of the Friends of Sabeel North America organization. So we had on lots of prominent guest speakers, and we had a very good Q&A. And what was done on this call was Scott Ritter went through what he experienced with the FBI, and then we had played a clip of Lyndon LaRouche talking about his persecution. So for people who don't know, Lyndon LaRouche was actually raided by the FBI in the 80s. And I think over 400 agents came, and there were shoot-to-kill orders if necessary. Shoot-to-kill if necessary. And Lynn was supposed to die that day, and he didn't. And he was persecuted because of his ideas, because of his pursuit for justice. This is why he was persecuted. This is why he was raided by the FBI. And Scott Ritter had said something at the end of his speech where he said, if people had rallied for Lyndon LaRouche back then, I wouldn't be going through what I'm going through now. And that's the context at which we're meeting at today. Every day, the proof that you're living in a fascist government, something worse than Nazi Germany, only becomes more and more apparent each day. So because you disagree with the empire and its rule and its rules-based order, because you don't agree with the fact that Netanyahu can just bomb the people he's trying to have peace with, because you don't agree with the fact that we have over 800 military bases around the world, you will be raided by the FBI, you will be censored, and you will be chewed out, and you will be shut out. That is what the status quo is right now by the establishment. But the way to combat that is not to take up arms or to get angry. And demonstrations do work, interventions do work, but you have to take it a step above. Just because you're against something does not give you the power to actually overturn these things, because you require an alternative vision. You need to have something to replace what you're trying to get rid of. Otherwise, it's just madness. We are all against genocide. We're all against wars. But how do you make sure there's never a genocide again? How do you make sure we never get into a war again? Lots of people protested around Vietnam, and yet here we are again. What's worse is that some of those people who were protesting Vietnam probably support Ukraine and have Ukrainian flags in their homes. Some of them probably even support Israel and its genocide against the Palestinian people. What was it that was missing from the Vietnam movement that did not end all wars there? That did not end all kinds of apartheid then? And I think that missing component is why we're having these classes. That was Lyndon LaRouche's idea. What do you replace a system that's dying, a system that requires death to survive? What do you replace it with? And that's why we have these class series. And so we had a wonderful introduction by Robert a couple weeks ago. Megan then started off introducing us into Lynn's economics. And now Jason today will continue to follow that up as an alternative vision for the future of humanity. So I'll pass it off to Jason.
Thank you, Jose. Thanks for the invitation to be here. So I want to follow up on a couple of concepts that came up last week with Megan's discussion about economics. One of the things that she had claimed was that the economic discoveries of Lyndon LaRouche were the most fundamental breakthroughs made in the last century. I believe you maybe said even longer than that.
I said perhaps it's human history today.
Okay, very important concept. So this is a real privilege to be able to discuss these. One of the concepts that she ended with was a question about value. And Jose also had talked about this, about a nail could be used to make a bed for a homeless shelter, or it could be used to make a bed in a whorehouse. And the question came up, was the value of the nail different in the homeless shelter bed or the whorehouse bed? And I don't feel like it fully got resolved in that discussion last week. I want to suggest that a way to think about it isn't in terms of going after the guy who's making the nails. Like, how could you make these nails? These are dual-use technologies. This could be used to kill somebody. This could be used for whorehouses. It should only be used for good things. The issue instead, I think, is think about what value means in other contexts. So the value, it's a word that we use a lot of ways. Maybe you're at the grocery store and you're getting a good value because something's on sale. Maybe you have moral values. You have things that you think are important and that aren't about how much something is worth, maybe, in a monetary sense, but how much something should be worth, what things ought to be. So when thinking about economic value, I think the way to pose the question is, what is the direction of the human species? Where are we going? Because when you try to trace it out from small things, you can always get back to the very largest question. Maybe you have a job that's doing something good. You're a doctor, let's say, you're helping people. What are those people doing? Wouldn't your value as a doctor be much higher if those people were all doing something truly useful and good? Doesn't mean you shouldn't be a doctor now, but how do you make more people's lives more meaningful? So from that, one of the biggest problems in creating an economy of growth right now, besides Wall Street and some of the obvious things of oligarchism, few people controlling so much of the resources, is the enemy within. And one of the biggest enemies within perhaps the minds of people in this room is the green ideology. A Malthusian ideology that says growth is bad, people are bad. Have you ever heard it said that we're unnatural, that we do unnatural things? Could anyone say how you might define natural, that you would conclude that? What's the natural world? Where does that word come from?
Things that aren't human, right? Like just the trees and the forest and the animals and stuff.
Okay, not human. That's pretty much often what natural means. So to say that we do things that are unnatural is sort of a little circular. What I want to know is, people stand up for the trees, or people are standing up for the animals. They're saying animals should have civil rights in court. Okay? This dog has been mistreated. This dog should be like a person in a court. This elephant is being, how is this elephant being treated by the circus? They're making it do demeaning things. It's standing on little things and, doing tricks for children. This is wrong. This elephant deserves to be in court and confront its oppressors. That happens. And there's even some countries and states where courts are trying to actually go with that. But what I want to know is who is standing up for the minerals? Now, before life took over this planet, there were a lot of rocks that were doing just fine. Now, how would you like to be a lovely piece of rock, basking in the sunlight, and now you've been covered up by soil, by trees, their roots are digging into you, tearing you apart? You might say that's unnatural. The most natural thing, I think, is the fact that the universe changes, and it improves and it grows. So over evolutionary time, we've seen life taken more, bring them in. We've seen life use more energy. Individual organisms using more energy, life as a whole becoming more energetic. Think about us, right? It takes a lot of energy to keep a human being going compared to a lizard or something like that. They don't have much of a metabolic rate. So the process overall has been one of an increase. And I'd like to focus in on that with this presentation today, talking about the concept of the limits to growth. So let's pull up our slides here. Okay, this is a pamphlet I'm happy to have worked on from the LaRouche organization, The Great Leap Backward. LaRouche crushes the Green New Deal fraud. And go ahead. Yes, there are no limits to growth. Next. Okay. Here's a lovely quote. The human population can no longer be allowed to grow in the same old, uncontrolled way. If we do not take charge of our population size, then nature will do it for us. This is that friendly man who narrates videos about squirrels and things like that. He wants to kill you. Okay, this last paragraph, if we do not take charge of our population size, nature will do it for us. What's he saying? He wants to take charge of our population size. He doesn't like people, especially people in countries that are considered overpopulated. If you think about countries that people say are overpopulated, would anyone be daring enough to name one?
He says Ethiopia.
He says Ethiopia. Okay. India. Any others?
China.
China. Right, lots of people. People don't usually say Belgium or the Netherlands or countries that actually have a very high population density. So this intent of reducing the population is at the core of this ideology. Go ahead. And next. So this is part of the origin. Thomas Malthus, who himself copied this from others, he said in a really dumb book written in 1798, the power of population is so superior to the power of the earth to produce subsistence for man, that premature death must in some shape or other visit the human race. Now, when he says the power of population, he means the growth of population. So he said that population would grow very quickly, but the amount of food available would not, and therefore we were going to run out of resources and run out of food. He wrote that more than 200 years ago. Was he right? He thought this was around the corner, okay? He thought we were coming close to the point where we wouldn't be able to support people. The world's population is at least more than an order of magnitude bigger than it was then. This is a modern, 50 years old, more modern reincarnation of this view from a group called the Club of Rome. Quote, if the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. They put out a whole study supposedly showing this, and we can look back 50 years later and see if they were right. Go ahead. So, Megan showed this chart last week. The growth of the human population, the enormous increase in the number of people, is something that no animal has done, except maybe animals that live with us, and no animal could do. Go ahead. So, accompanying this big growth in population, take a look here. This is the amount of land that's used per person for agriculture. So over the last 100 years, the amount of agricultural land per person has fallen in half. What does that mean? How did that happen? How come there's only half as much farmland per person living on this earth today compared to 100 years ago? But we're still eating.
Efficiency.
You're getting more out of the land. There are a lot of ways that we get more out of the land. Go ahead. This is just another breakdown showing by continent. I don't know if you can see it, how clearly you can see it, but over the last 60 years or so, the greatest decrease in land use, agricultural land use per person, has been on the continent of Africa, where it's fallen more than in half in just the last 60 years. Go ahead. So the way this has happened, part of it has been changing plants. So genetic engineering, in the sense of, maybe doing it in the lab, is new. But we've been changing plants and animals for a long time. Weird dog breeds, those didn't occur in nature, we made them. Same with the foods that we like to eat. This is what watermelons used to look like. It doesn't look very tasty. Now, so what we've done is, by breeding them, we've got them so that it's mostly what you want, and just a bit of rind. This is what a banana used to look like. Look at all those nasty seeds in it. You wouldn't want to eat those. We made bananas better. Go ahead. Just a couple other examples of plants. We get, this is an original carrot. This is the all-natural carrot. You want to go back to nature, eat this. This is corn. There was barely any corn on it. So we've transformed these things. That's one of the ways that we've been able to get more food out of less land, is we've changed how plants grow. Go ahead. And the next. All right. Okay, so agricultural land use has gone way down. Next slide. Let's talk about energy. So this is, This is the energy use per person in China. And if you can't see it, this is over the last about 40 years. It's up 6 times. 6 times as much energy per person in 40 years. Is that a good thing?
Yes.
Well, what do the Chinese think? Are they happy to be having more energy available? They're pretty happy about it, right? Yeah, it's a good thing. Next slide. And actually, we can skip that. So I thought I deleted a few of these. I guess I didn't. Next. Okay. So here's the U.S. over a longer historical period since our founding. The amount of energy used, this is per person, has increased compared to colonial times. But it's not just the amount of energy that increased. The kind of energy has improved. We used to use wood. That kind of phased out. We used a lot of coal. If this continued, that's actually shrinking pretty rapidly right now. Oil and natural gas. The top one, fission. What's fission?
Nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy. Yeah, just this little bit. Should have been much more. So let me ask, what can you do with coal that you can't do with wood? Why did we shift to using coal instead of wood?
Steam engines.
Okay. How does that? What's the benefit of coal versus wood for that?
Coal burns at a higher temperature. So you could boil water with wood, but you can create a much more efficient steam-powered engine that you can fit on like a train, with coal.
Because one thing is, trains have to carry all their fuel with them. Right? So if you have wood, it would be a lot. There's another big reason. How about in a factory? In a factory, you're not carrying all this fuel around with you. It's just located there. Why would you use coal instead of wood in your factory to power the machinery?
You'd run out of wood if you.
That's one thing. You're not going to have any trees anymore if you keep cutting them down. So yeah, coal is good because you can do better things with trees. You can make houses out of them and things like that. The other thing is, it was just a lot cheaper. A lot cheaper to go in and get out a whole bunch of coal. So it was more efficient in terms of, when I say cheaper, I mean the human labor. The amount of human effort to power a train by coal was less than if you wanted to do it with wood. Oil and natural gas. Why are we using that now instead of coal?
more efficient, even less
Cleaner.
cheaper?
Isn't it cleaner?
It's cleaner. Natural gas is definitely cleaner than coal. For people who are worried about carbon dioxide, you get more energy with less of it with natural gas. I don't think that's really something to worry about because the real issue here would be nuclear.
The problem in Russia, they had 3 nuclear things. They had a picture of it, overload or what have you, and it's a catastrophe right now, just like Chernobyl.
Well, the Ukrainians are trying to
We know about
create
that.
a catastrophe
That's,
with this. Yeah. Well, wars cause many problems. What about nuclear? Why was it ever a good idea, and why is it still so small today? What was the reason anyone ever made nuclear plants? Why'd we do that?
They put out so much power,
They make a lot of power. That's true.
and they're actually, if you have a 17-year-old nuclear power plant, it's the cheapest way to get electricity by far.
That's very specific. Okay. Yeah, it's cheap. Go ahead. All right, so this is a chart. So each dot on this chart is a country. And so going along this way, the farther to the right the dot is, the more energy each person in that country uses. The vertical line is infant mortality. How many kids are dying in birth or when they're very young? You can see it's real clear. Countries with more energy per person have lower deaths, lower infant mortality. Yeah. One thing is if you don't have any electricity, what kind of hospital do you have? You can't run it. Babies born prematurely, you don't have any oxygen, you don't have anything to take care of them, for example. Go ahead. Let's skip this one. Too small. Go ahead. All right. Okay, we talked about energy. Let's talk about a couple of materials that we use. This is the world production of what's called fixed nitrogen. It basically means fertilizer. So from almost nothing when this was first invented in 1946, we now produce so much artificial fertilizer. Artificial meaning like it didn't come from horse behind or something like that. Yeah, right. It means that we made it chemically. That now about 1/5 of the nitrogen in people's bodies around this planet came from man-made nitrogen fertilizer. This is one of the big reasons that agricultural land per capita went way down, because you get so much more crops out of it. You don't have to waste a bunch of land getting a bad yield. Go ahead. And here's one other example of production. This is aluminum. There used to be basically no aluminum at all. Like in 1900, it was practically zero. And we've had this huge increase in using aluminum. Does anyone know why that happened? Why weren't we using aluminum before the 50s? What happened?
We couldn't make it.
Couldn't make it. Why not?
Takes a lot of electricity, right?
It takes a lot of electricity. You can't make it with chemical means. It's almost impossible. You need electricity to make aluminum. So this great material only became available to us with a higher energy use and with a more concentrated electrical energy use. Go ahead. And one more. Okay, so now let's talk about this book. In 1972, this evil group called the Club of Rome wrote The Limits to Growth, where they said the world is going to run out of space, it's going to run out of food, we're all going to die, so let's get started with the dying right now. Stop developing poorer countries. Don't develop them. If you do, there'll be more people, and we can't have all these people. So this was a justification for a neo-colonial policy that said underdeveloped countries should stay that way. And they said, oh, it's because we care about the environment. Mm-mm. Right. Let's take a look at what they pulled together here. Go ahead. All right, this is a little hard to say. Let me point through this a bit. So this is their chart of what the whole world would do. This is the entire world from 1900 to 2100. And this is on a computer in 1972. So you can imagine how much it was actually able to do at all. Here's resources. Resources. Uh-oh, the resources go down. Here's the population. More and more people around 2050. Uh-oh, no more resources, everybody dies. So they said because, you know, everyone's going to die, let's just make sure they're not born in the first place. It's more compassionate, they said. Next slide. They realized that, well, maybe we're wrong about the amount of resources. Maybe we just haven't discovered all the resources on this planet. Let's double the amount of resources. Maybe that will work. So here the resources start up real high, but still eventually they go down, the population comes up and down, pollution just shoots up, whatever this would even mean. So they said, see, we're still doomed. Next slide. Then they said, let's say there's no limit to resources. In that case, okay, here's the population growing, but still we're going to run out of food, and there's going to be so much pollution that we're all going to die. So, you sensing a similar theme going on here? All right, next one. Then they said, okay, well, what if we had unlimited resources and we had pollution controls so that we wouldn't all die from pollution? Then what do they say happens? Well, the population is still gonna collapse because we're gonna run out of food. Basically what Thomas Malthus said. There's gonna be a limit to the amount of food, and therefore the population is gonna collapse. When did they say food is gonna reach its max? Basically, you know, about 5-10 years ago. This didn't happen. So, given that every time they keep changing their model, we last a little longer before we collapse, maybe you should ask the question, well, if we just kept improving, then we're never going to collapse. What this book is actually proving is that if you don't grow, you're going to die. Or what they're, I'm not even going to say they're proving that because it was pretty bad. Jump ahead, please. Oh, whoops. Actually, go back to that. Okay, forget it. Just another crazy chart. Jump ahead to the next chart. This is to just take one example of a specific material, chromium. I just picked this one at random. They said, here's the amount of chromium, and it's going to decrease over time. We're going to be, here we are, here's us 2020, or around 2020. So less and less chromium, and eventually the use of chromium, we're going to run out of it, and that's going to be it. Next slide. Let's see what really happened. Okay, this is, I guess my edit didn't take here. Believe it or not, there is more chromium available today than there was 50 years ago, even though we've been using it. Why is that?
We found more.
We found more of it. The big Earth. We found some more. The use, which would have been this little line right here, it's actually off the chart. It would be up about here, the amount that we use each year today. So we're using way more, and still the amount available goes up. So the whole, I think I maybe made the point enough. This was really, really wrong. And it didn't come from honesty. It came from that ideological goal of halting development and using environmentalism as an excuse for it. Go ahead. Next slide. Go ahead. All right. So if we are going to see huge development across the Earth, if this becomes the nighttime view instead of current on the left, how are we going to make that happen? Let's take a look at the next slide. So now here's this concept of energy flux density I want to say a little bit more about. Go ahead. All right, this sort of follows up from what we talked about a little bit before. 1 ton of wood, same energy in 500 pounds of coal. So if you're running a train, you would much rather have coal than wood because it's gonna be too much. Oil, even better. Another good thing, could you run a car on coal? What makes it so much easier to run a car on oil?
And pumping it.
Pumping it. Yeah, you can squirt the gasoline into the engine. Coal, I mean, you can open it up and throw in a rock and then close it. I mean, that's why these liquid fuels are just so much better. And then here's uranium. This is what nuclear power plants use to make energy. So instead of 1 ton or 500 pounds, this says 0.0002 pounds. That tiny bit of uranium has the same amount of energy as this big truckload of wood. Seems like a good idea to use it. Go ahead. So some people say, well, yeah, but what if we don't use fuel at all? What if we use the free wind and the solar and the water? There's a place for some of that, especially hydroelectricity. You can get a lot of power from rivers. But look at how much material they require. So here's a nuclear plant. This is the total amount of stuff that gets involved in making a nuclear plant to make a certain amount of power. If you wanted to make that same amount of energy using solar panels, look at how much materials you're going to have to use. Materials that you've got to mine, that you've got to process, that you got to manufacture, that you got to move around, you got to install, you got to build it. It uses 1,000 times more land or more to make energy with solar panels compared to a nuclear plant, including its fenced-off area around it. It's terribly inefficient. Go ahead. Okay, so here we go. Back to we're in school, I guess. So on the left, this is natural gas. So if you have a gas stove or whatever, this is the molecule that's burning and cooking your food. The only thing I want to say about it is that each molecule of natural gas makes 8 units of energy. Over here is a nuclear reaction. 2 bits of hydrogen come together to become helium. This is what happens in the sun. Every time that happens, two hydrogens coming together, like these two right here, if we combine them, we get 17 million units of energy. 1 million times more energy in one of these reactions than one of these ones. It's pretty great. Go ahead. Question is, why aren't we using this? Now, one reason is so far we aren't able to actually make power with that process. We can make bombs, but that's not very helpful. And so there's research. This picture, we'll see another one, of people doing work on figuring out, go ahead, on how to use that process of nuclear fusion, of the combination of really small nuclei. Go ahead. All right, there's too many slides on this, so let's jump ahead about 5 or 6. Okay, I should go back 1. Just to put in context, this is an old chart. This is from 2018. So here, it's kind of covered up here, but this blue line down here was the total cost of going to the moon. This is how much money was spent on renewable energy in 2018. Last year, it was up here, double that. This is the amount it was estimated that if we really put in a huge amount of money, and we could get that fusion energy, that nuclear fusion. So we could use hydrogen as fuel. That's all it would have cost, is the estimate. What we spent was off the screen. It was so low. Who didn't want that new technology, and why? Go ahead. All right, so let's talk about where this growth is coming from. Because we've had these changes. We've got aluminum now. We've got nuclear power. We've got electricity. What made it possible for us to do that? And why is it that the squirrels, in the tree, they're not doing any of that? The cows, they're not doing any of this. Where did all this come from? Go ahead. So the, next please. All right. So LaRouche's view of this is that the reason human beings have economies and economic growth is because we're fundamentally different from the animals. So, have you ever seen an animal use tools?
Yes, monkey poking a stick into them.
That's one example. Yep, monkeys use a stick to grab bugs and they enjoy them.
Crows also use sticks.
Crows use sticks? What do they use
Things
for?
like that. I've seen videos of crows using hooked sticks to pull objects out of enclosed spaces.
Oh, wow.
Things like that.
Dolphins use rocks to smash open mollusks or something like that.
Okay. Might be otters.
It's true.
Too. Oh, yeah, they lay them on their belly and crack them open. So there's definitely animals that use tools. What makes our tools different?
Online,
Say again?
online,
A
we
mine.
have more, we evolved form. I mean, we came from the 80s, right?
So these tools that animals are using, they're things. Human beings, let's take one of the first technologies, fire. That's a tool that animals don't use. We do. And it's it's not really a thing. I mean, it's out there, but it's a process. Making fire, that's fun. That's a lot different than, breaking off a stick and using it to get some termites, because your concept isn't a physical one. So fire is the first thing. The Greek myth of Prometheus says that fire is what first made the human species different from the animals. The figure Prometheus says, I stole fire from Zeus in heaven and I gave it to mankind. And with that fire and with that knowledge of agriculture and everything else, this is where humanity came from. So our tools, things like nuclear science or magnetism or figuring out how to make an engine work, those tools, they're mental tools. Animals don't have them. Go ahead, let's take a look at the countering British view that's very common today. Next slide, please. This is Adam Smith. Anybody heard of this guy?
Yeah.
What'd you hear about him?
Wealth of Nations.
What's that?
It's an economic tract about how nations can get ahead.
Okay. So if you studied economics in school, and I didn't, so I'm just thinking this is the case. This is one of the famous guys that people say this was a brilliant genius. He created economic science.
It was on I studied the great books of the Western civilization. It was on the program that I studied.
Do you remember when he wrote The Wealth of Nations?
It was written in 1776.
Okay, did anything else happen in 1776 you can think of?
Nothing I can think of.
Right. So you have this British asshole writing something that's totally counter, actually. Anyway, let me read this quote from 1759. But though we are in this manner endowed with a very strong desire of those ends, it has not been entrusted to the slow and uncertain determinations of our reason to find the proper means of bringing them about. We might have desires, but we can't figure out how to get them. Nature has directed us to the greater part of these by original and immediate instincts. Next. Hunger, thirst, the passion which unites the two sexes, the love of pleasure and the dread of pain, prompt us to apply those means for their own sakes, and without any consideration of their tendency to those beneficent ends which the great director of nature intended to produce by them. Quite a few words here. Whoop, no, I'll come back. So, another creepy British guy coming up. So he's saying that our own desires, our desires to get ahead, that's enough to make progress. That the reason humanity's moved forward isn't because people tried to improve it. You can't use reason to advance. You just got to try to satisfy your instincts. You want to get something? Okay, well maybe you have to figure out a way to make the money to pay for it, or get it some other way. But you got to engage yourself. You got to make it happen, and you get that thing for yourself, and then that's going to encourage people to have made those things, and there's a whole market and everything. But don't try to improve it. He's saying that human reason, not only is ineffective, but you shouldn't even try to think about how to improve the future. Okay. Yeah. All right. Next. This is an actual picture of this man. He's a mummy now. I forget which university. Basically, he was always on the board of directors or something like this. So when they would have their meetings, they would roll out his mummified body to sit in on the meetings. It was Oxford or something. This is the British, okay? Creepy. So what does he say? He has said, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as determine what we shall do. So the only way you should run your life is to seek out pleasures and avoid things that are painful, like homework. Or, or other things, or work, right? Is that a good idea?
That will leave you a heroin addict or something like that.
That's what it sounds like, right?
One possibility.
Pleasure flux density.
Pleasure points. All right, let's move. Let's get that off there. Huh. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, great. So just to pull this together then and talk about the power of reason in all of this, and this is something that we're gonna get to over the coming weeks. Can't do everything in one day. We're gonna end up talking about how it is that the human mind discovers those non-things, those ideas. How do we discover how do we create an idea? How do we know if it's true? How do we create an education where kids go through discoveries, where kids find out how we came to know something? You know, in school, you have to memorize things, right? Here's the formula for this. You're supposed to memorize this and use it on a test. You don't even know if that formula is true. An educational system doesn't treat people like they ought to even know about that. Right? No, look, you just do this because you'll need this to do your job. Instead of saying, hey, you're a kid, you're curious about everything. If you say why, I shouldn't say shut up, that's how it is. I should actually answer you, right? Because then you get the most important thing. We could get kids in touch with that part of themselves that can bring out a genius in them. I don't think that's what the schools are. They're not succeeding in it today. They're not trying. That's not even the goal. So that's going to be one of the topics we're going to take up. We're going to talk about infrastructure in particular, about how, for example, when Franklin Roosevelt built roads, and water systems, and bridges, and all things like that, how that transforms the economy that's different from just your personal day-to-day economy. You know, you might try to save up some money to start up a small business and do this or whatever. Okay. But you can't individually say, I'm going to build a subway system, or I'm going to build, a bridge across the river. Right? Today, that's something that governments do. There's a special value to those. We're also going to talk about culture. What's the connection between your culture and your economic potential? Does the way you spend your leisure time carry over? Think about this on a social level. Does the way society spends its leisure time, does that have any impact on what kind of political choices it makes or doesn't make? What kind of discoveries get made? How are you spending your time? Where's your mind? And then next slide. I think I'm forgetting one. Oh, you know what? I think that's too much. Jump ahead, I think 4. Yeah. One more. Again. Okay, coming up. Go ahead. Oh yeah, infrastructure, culture, and economics. Oh yeah. I'm sorry. Our big one, AI and human reason. So is ChatGPT going to replace all of us? What's the difference between? You said no. What's the difference between what you get from ChatGPT versus human knowledge? That's going to be something we're going to really dig into. I mean, one big thing is just because ChatGPT tells you something, is it true?
But it was built by a human.
It was built by a human. That's true. That's true.
It's programmed by us.
Yeah, we made it. Yeah. And we made this thing and it gives us answers, and sometimes they're wrong. Now, the only way you know if it's wrong is if you actually know that material yourself. So if you don't know anything and you use ChatGPT and you end up trusting it, right? You can't, there's no escape. You have to actually know something personally. So those are some of the topics coming up, and my main focus for tonight was just to review it, a couple concepts. One of them was the population, the potential population of the human species is determined by our changing our relationship to nature. We saw that in agriculture, making different kinds of foods, bringing in fertilizer. Didn't even talk about bringing in water, refrigerating the food so it doesn't go bad. You know, a lot of food gets wasted around the world if you don't have refrigeration and transportation or a place to can it so it stays good. You know, can your fruits. So yeah, the potential population density is related to the technologies and culture we have at our disposal. The second main point I went through tonight was energy flux density, about why energy is essential and about how it comes in different forms. And you can do things with higher forms of energy that you just can't, even with an infinite amount of a lower form of energy. You can have a whole big pile of wood, but if you don't have something to turn it into electricity, you can't, yeah, right, you can't, you just can't. There's a lot of things you can't do. And then the third main theme was about the environment. I don't even want to call it environmentalism. Malthusian, right? It gets presented as environmentalism, but essentially this sort of just article of faith that you're supposed to believe people are bad, there's too many of us. People are a blight instead of a blessing. And that's something that even people who might think they're progressive often end up believing. So they say, well, maybe we shouldn't have wars, but we also shouldn't have population growth. So maybe instead of people dying by bombs, they should die from poverty. A lot of people think that, even if they might not realize it, but they do. So that's what I wanted to open with. And let's talk. Let's talk. All right. Hey.
Questions?
I have a question. Just to try to tie in together some of the presentation with the briefing. I mean, so Jose was talking about the raid on Scott Ritter's home and this sort of escalation of the suppression of free speech in the country, and particularly free speech of people who are trying to intervene to stop these wars. And you went through a lot of different things regarding the sort of whole Malthusian agenda, which has been taking place for a long time. But you mentioned Lyndon LaRouche, but some people know that there's a very clear connection between what happened to Lyndon LaRouche in terms of being directly targeted by the FBI and what's happening to Scott Ritter now. And I'm wondering if there's a way that it could be made more clear how there's a continuity from this sort of there are no limits to growth 1972 Malthusian agenda to a situation where now we have a culture that's completely incapable of intervening to stop genocide and nuclear war, and a government that is completely, committed to this course of depopulation. I mean, we're funding depopulation in Gaza. We're funding depopulation in Ukraine. So it seems like conceptually there's a connection.
Can I take that up? Yeah, okay, I guess so.
Okay.
I think just making sure I'm still good here. Just gonna put up some things that people were saying during the show. I think there's a commitment that people have in the world to Malthusianism and evil. The reason why a lot of our neighborhoods are poor and why a lot of countries are underdeveloped today is because there is a real solid commitment to make sure that they are that way. You could call it blanket racism, but I think it's even more malicious than just that. I think it's the fact that there are people who believe that human beings are animals. And they are so committed to that idea that a glimmer of hope that you would even suggest otherwise has to be suppressed. And so I think this goes back to Plato and Aristotle. Plato believed that humanity is good and that there is something more to us, that we are divine. Whereas Aristotle believed we are only of the earth and we die with the earth and that's it. There's nothing else. And some people are born to rule. This is a real thing from Aristotle. A lot of people nowadays, they know Aristotle as like this great philosopher who's often quoted. If you read Politics, I did this when I first came around, that's why I know this quote. Politics, book 1, paragraph 6. Are some people born to rule and are some people born to be slaves? Yes, he says. Some people are just born to rule and some people are just born to be slaves. What do you want me to say, But you should be happy to be a slave because you're not a cow. You're a human slave. So you still have all your senses and stuff. So that's cool. You're aware that you're a slave and that's fine. And, you have to because that's just the natural order of things. And so this kind of commitment to keep people as animals is where oligarchy comes from, is where fascism comes from, that some people are just, and what you see with the cranking down on Scott Ritter and on Lyndon LaRouche and the actual economic conditions is the reality that just is not in coherence with natural law. It's not in coherence with nature. These things don't correlate with one another. You can't actually believe people are human beings and have a society that works. It doesn't work. That's what I would say. You want to add something, Jason?
Yeah, just a bit. I put the attacks on LaRouche. So LaRouche was he ran for president 8 times. Once as basically his own party, and then 7 times he sought the nomination as the Democratic candidate for president. Last time he ran was 2004. He was having a huge amount of success globally and getting a new economic system for the world. He was organizing for what he called an international development bank. He said the institutions created after World War II that were supposed to help the world develop and grow after World War II, they weren't. He said we need an international development bank, not a colonial bank, a development bank. And so he got motion towards that from many countries, including the non-aligned movement. Anyway, there's a lot that he had done. And because of his success, he became a target. Let's go back a little bit before the 1980s raid on the LaRouche movement. How about look at the 1960s? There were a lot of people who showed real leadership in the 1960s who met an early end, didn't they? Yeah. Who did we lose in the 60s? Kennedy. Who else?
His brother too.
His brother?
King.
Martin Luther King.
X.
Malcolm X. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole, and that's just in the U.S. There were people being killed in Africa, being killed in Europe, people that were trying to end the Cold War and say, let's develop, put Europe back together again, like in Germany. Like German bankers were killed because they were talking about working together. And they said, no, we're going to keep the conflict. So the attack on LaRouche, his imprisonment, he was given a 15-year sentence. Many of the other members of the LaRouche movement many were arrested, and then there were a significant number that had sentences, some of them over a decade served. This was an attempt to shut down ideas. Yeah. So because that wasn't successfully fought at the time, it's sort of like when Kennedy was killed and the Warren Commission did a cover-up and people didn't fight about it immediately enough at the time. Now we've seen this continuation where there's an assassination bureau that'll just take you out. And so what do you do about that? Do you
You speak up, they kill you, basically.
Right.
You're a target.
Right. So one solution is I won't speak up. And that doesn't work out very well for society as a whole. You gotta remember, you spend most of your life being dead. I mean, the impact of your life, and most of it's gonna come, you're dead for a lot longer than you're alive. what's the importance of that living part of it going to be when you have some control over what you mean? So.
Well, can I just add that, I mean, I think to your question, Robert, the subject of energy flux density and the graph that Jason showed in terms of the U.S. investment into fusion energy, well, the leading movement in the world for fusion energy and research is the LaRouche movement. And we are the ones who got the U.S. Congress to pass a bill for fusion funding. And that was the process that was attacked by the political attack on suppression of Lyndon LaRouche. Is that you're really the leading voice in the world for the breakthroughs in energy flux density that would make it possible to develop the entirety of the world, and specifically fusion energy for the development of Africa. That leading voice was put in prison in the United States and shut down by the FBI, by Henry Kissinger, by the Bush family, by British intelligence. Well, LaRouche is the guy who we're talking about, who promoted this idea of breakthroughs in science, and specifically in fusion energy.
I guess I have a question about just sort of to Robert's question about drawing a line between a thread from the limits to growth people to some of today's, I'll call them Malthusians, but I think there are a lot of people who are green people who, if you ask them, say, "Oh no, I'm not a Malthusian. I don't believe in the Club of Rome. I just am afraid of pollution and the rising sea levels, and the Club of Rome people were warning us about global cooling and an ice age, and I'm worried about global warming." So they insist that they're doing something very different, and I was wondering if anybody could speak to that and try to clarify that that direct the lineage of these ideas.
Well, the global warming concept was sort of an advancement of their approach. In other words, if you were trying to think of the most clear physical connection to economic growth, it would probably be CO2, because that's where basically all energy comes from, sources that produce CO2. If you were trying to say, hey, we need to stop development in the world, you couldn't pick a better target than saying CO2 is a problem. Now, does CO2 have an impact on the climate and the Earth? It does. How much is that effect? And how certain are we about that effect? And then when people, you see on TV and they say, anytime there's bad weather, they say it's climate change. Like we never had bad weather before. How does that person on the news know this is climate change as opposed to just bad weather, right? They don't. They're just saying it. It's just a thing that kind of floats around in the air. The other aspect of this that lets you know it's crap is, where does the push for nuclear then? I mean, nuclear doesn't make any CO2. If you were really saying we need to stop CO2 production and you still wanted people to grow and have energy, you would say, let's build nuclear plants. They make a lot of energy.
we fall into the trap of mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. Like
So what do you think they meant by that?
Anyway, yeah, I have material to share and send around just about more of what Jason was going through with the British lineage of the environmentalists.
And also, where did all the money for the renewables? Where's that money going? What is that going into? Because it obviously has nothing to do with improving the conditions of life for people. And that's a matter of blowing the financial bubble that is, in process of collapse.
That was one thing that I was reflecting on when I saw the you had multiple bar diagrams. There was one where you were showing the materials, but there was another one where you were showing the dollars spent, right?
Mm-hmm.
The bar diagram with the dollars spent on renewables compared to the hypothetical dollars spent to create a nuclear fusion program that would obviously exceed the energy output, and that the clear so you have a relatively small amount of money that hypothetically would have created a much greater amount of energy, and then we see now this kind of skyrocketing monetary expenditure on something which is supposedly about saving us from some inevitable destruction or saving us from some lack which is supposed to have been there, but it expressed in monetary terms, it seems very, very clear that it's bound up with what we know to be the financial bankruptcy of the whole international financial system. So I don't know if there's a way to expound on that.
Well, and there's a lot of these, funds that get involved in environmental and sustainability and so forth. That kind of became a hip thing on Wall Street. You can't do an investment unless it's sustainable. One of the places this has happened, let me give an example. Nigeria recently opened a very big oil refinery. It's the 7th largest in the world, processes hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil a day. It produces enough that it should be able to end for all the countries of West Africa. They can supply all their gasoline needs. They wouldn't have to import it from anywhere else. And of course, it's under attack. This is environmentally bad, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you're going to refine it somewhere else and bring it anyway, right? So it's obviously just an attack on Nigeria's development. And the chairman of I think it was called the Africa Energy Commission, he said, look, this is enough of these attacks. Okay, enough of these attacks on energy in Africa. One thing he said is that the environmentalism, the green stuff, prevents building power plants. If the World Bank says we will not pay for coal power plants, and you have to buy windmills and solar panels, you're saying poverty is the goal, because you just don't get that much energy from windmills and solar panels compared to just building a coal plant. So you're saying, oh no, it might be bad for the future. Meanwhile, you're going to stay in poverty. You need to sacrifice so that the world's better in the future. I know I'm not answering your question, but I still thought that was worth saying.
But clearly someone is funding and sponsoring these attacks or these narratives.
Yeah.
What these African leaders like the Bobi is saying, hey, we're not doing this, but who's funding this narrative? It's almost like a boogeyman.
Yeah.
It's a narrative. And that narrative, I think it goes way back, whether it's the war on gangs, drugs, pollution, it's now war on terror, war on our people. You just fill in the blank and you change the agenda we're going to attack. But there's clearly a pattern that Robert was saying that goes on throughout time that is shifting. But the pattern is there because now it's a war on you. And what's wrong with it? It's clean energy, it's providing, growth, so much great things. But clearly there's environmental groups who are funding the narrative that this is bad, it causes mass destruction. And those are the same groups who have been funding the war on terror, the war in the Middle East, the war on gangs, the war on people. people, the war on pollution, the war on you name it, they got it. So I think that's what Robert maybe was trying to pinpoint somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think a useful example is Paul Wolfowitz, because he was the president of the World Bank. He's a architect of the sort of concept of NATO supremacy at the end of the Cold War, and obviously I don't have specifics, but the World Bank, the IMF, these are the international lending institutions that create conditionalities. And they're saying, well, yeah, it's a nice idea, but you can build it as long as you make it out of sticks, and all your children keep dying, right? So the same people that actually put forward the ideas that have us in this mess now, where we're trapped in all these wars, are directly involved in the financial institutions.
The preparation of it,
Yeah.
we're seeing it, the pattern, the symbolism over time. So clearly, these guys see that these atrocities that are being played out, whether they're in South America, Central America, Africa, or even here locally, they are coming from the same club of Rome or the thinkers.
Yep, I think so. I mean, Robert mentioned some of the connections there. I mean, one big thing is that the British have a really common thread in this. A lot of the environmentalist groups, for example, that are used to try to stop development in Africa, they get big money from Britain. This is one of their big ways of control. I mean, it's that and other like social, civic society groups. It's like, oh, this is a little nonprofit or something like that, and it's a way of getting your fingers in and controlling policy.
Oh, I just wanted to put a plug for our great plans for great projects. Lyndon LaRouche, when he was alive, had a dream to develop Africa. And he also had plans for India. He actually met with Indira Gandhi with a plan to develop India. So the thing that has been the big threat, the LaRouche movement going back years, is that we are optimistic about the future. And I think there's reason to be optimistic because many of the development plans have been brought into fruition to the great benefit of the people who have used them. So perhaps you can speak to that.
Say a bit. I mean, that was another thing I wanted to mention about. We should have a whole presentation on this. The whole world development perspective of the LaRouche movement. We've got multiple books about all of this. To mention just a couple of the biggest projects in some of those regions. I mean, one of the hugest potentials for hydropower, well, the biggest potential for new hydropower on the planet is on the Congo River. Enormous flow of water, and pretty near where it goes out into the ocean, it loses elevation real quick. It's very, very steep. Perfect place for hydroelectricity. You could get enough hydroelectricity there to provide tens of millions of people at a good standard of living their energy. Tens of millions. It's enormous potential. And it's been sitting around. The World Bank said, oh yeah, we'd like to help you build this. And they said, no, it's bad for the fish or something like this. So China has tried to get involved with it. Chinese companies saying, well, maybe we could help build this thing. But it's a perfect example of something that would be obvious and easy to do in a different world paradigm that wasn't one of war and conflict and stopping development. Another one is Lake Chad. Lake Chad is, it's drying up and shrinking. It's like a tenth of its previous size. There's plans to bring water from the Congo River up to refill Lake Chad. And along the way, you could use it for irrigation or travel. You could refill the lake. That would again improve the lives of tens of millions of people. But one of the objections is, well, you can't move water from one water basin to another because it might be bad for the environment. There might be some fish in this water, and if they get in there, it's going to cause a disaster. So instead, sorry, tens of millions of people are going to not have any water. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, there'll be no fish left in the
Right. Oh, that's true. It turns to desert, there's no fish anyway. Yeah, right. The big breakthrough came in 2013. for our vision, the LaRouche movement's vision. We had this vision of a world land bridge. And in 2013, China started something called the Belt and Road Initiative. And what China has been doing is they have been making a big difference in financing around the world, because now countries can look not only at Europe or the US, now they also have China. And China has been a lot less interested in giving lectures. So China says, you want a loan to build this power plant? All right, let's look at it. Make the power plant, sell the power, you can pay the loan back. Okay. Whereas a European country is going to say, well, is this going to be an environmentally friendly power plant? How many local people will you be hiring? What kind of wages will you be paying them? Do you have a healthcare plan for them? Do you have childcare? Just things like that. They get all in their business. And what about the fish? And so it's much easier to work with it's much easier to work with the Chinese. So the thing is, it shouldn't be, U.S. versus China. We could work together. This Grand Inga Dam on the Congo River would be a great opportunity if U.S. and China were both actually helping make something like that happen instead of stopping it. What else we got? We got the proposals for a new canal across Thailand, because right now all shipping that goes from like China and then down over to India and Africa passes through this one very small strait of water. There's basically a capacity. You really can't fit many more ships through it. So we need to build a new canal through Thailand to get more ships going through. That would be another example of a major project. Across South America, a coastal connection, Bio-Oceanic corridor connecting the east and west coast of South
This is
America.
like the Panama Canal.
There's also talk about building a new Panama Canal through Nicaragua. This would be something that would go across the land. It's like across like from Brazil. And then along the way, all the towns along the way, along their rail line, they're going to have access to both coasts. That's going to be real good for them. So they could go over to the Atlantic side or the Pacific side. So this is another example of the project.
Bering Strait.
The connecting Alaska and Russia. We can build a bridge or tunnel right there across the Bering Strait. It's not that far.
How about Florida, the Caribbean?
But that's a little longer.
Like, that's a big one.
But yeah, it's funny. We call this thing the World Land Bridge, and then some activists who live on islands say, "How about just the World Bridge?" Okay, we aren't all connected by land, so I see the argument for that.
So just a question, you're making the point that some great leaders were eliminated, and we see that that's like the method of whoever's running this world, that when they see a person that's not falling in line with their agenda, somehow they'll ruin you. Whether they'll take your life, they'll take all your money, they'll ruin you somehow, your reputation. So with the LaRouche worldview, is it one where those people are eliminated? These billionaires, people who have the money to spend on social engineering, they have this zoomed out vision of the world and have an idea of how things should go. They have endless resources to kind of thwart any kind of idea anybody has on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, their power sure has to be eliminated.
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of them deserve to be in prison, or maybe all of them. I don't know exactly what crime that would be under, but their power has to be eliminated. The other thing, the big ally is reality, because these people, it's like they're insisting. They're like, this is the way it's going to be. And sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. It's like a little kid saying, I want this. And it's like, well, you just can't. That's not going to happen. That's not possible, kid. Kids demanding it. That's like them. So they're saying, Russia's going to give up. We're going to beat Russia. Ukraine is going to kick Russia's ass. Ridiculous. What are they heading towards? A nuclear war with Russia. And they're saying, hey, we're so crazy, we're willing to do it. Hopefully the Russians will back down, because we're crazy. And we don't want to live in a world where we're not in control. We'll blow it up. We'll take that risk. That's fine. Who wants to live in this world if the people are running?
Putin's the richest man in the world. I watched the show last night. He's got more cars, more anything. He's married to an 18-year-old girl. Somebody said. He's living like
He's a gold medalist.
And he's a gold everything. Forget about it. He's evil. I mean,
Well, just have him. I don't know what to say. I'm among the evil people in the world. I don't think I'd include Putin as among the most evil.
well, he's up to it. Believe me.
Yeah. But the just to finish the so actually I forgot what I was going to say.
Can I add a brief comment to respond to Nathan, right?
Yeah.
I called you on the phone once, I'm Daniel.
Hi. All right.
You know, I mean, to elaborate on this idea that like the vision that these people have for the world has nothing to do with reality. All empires extinguish themselves, right? Because it is not possible to run the world on the basis of money looting and mass genocide. You can't do that. It doesn't function. So we're facing a total breakdown of the financial economic situation in the West, which has a global impact. But to the point about the change in the conditions with China and what's been happening since 2013, but for decades, I saw a report this week that every year China adds an amount of electricity production that is equivalent to the entire nation of Germany. Now, if you think about like the paragon of industrial capability in the Western mind, isn't it Germany, Japan, and the United States, right? But what's happening in Germany right now is not just that they're being dwarfed by China, but they're going in the opposite direction. They're plunging. The economy is absolutely plunging because of such things as the fact that they let their friends in the White House and in London make sure that that pipeline was blown up. Remember the one from the Nord Stream from Russia into Germany. So all of these, fantasies of empire are self-destructive, and it's in that context that we're, it certainly could be that we just end up losing humanity, right? That's the whole reason that we had to do something, is that these people are crazy enough to go to World War III. But on the other hand, they're not creative thinkers. They don't have the power of reason, and therefore they lack the key thing that we have, which is the ability to change it. So.
One thing though, the Wall Street Journal just figured out that the Nord Stream was blown up by 6 people on a yacht after a night of drinking. So they all got drunk and they blew up the pipeline.
I did that once when I was younger.
Who hasn't?
I just wanted to touch point on what Nathan was his question, and you say these people. You mentioned these people, and my understanding is that they're corporations. We don't know. They're not people. They're corporation, and these corporations, they're known as Blackwell or Blackstone or Black Rock or Black. Yeah. So you mentioned these people. They're not people. And you mentioned what crime should they be charged with? Well, they're corporations. They're merging, and they've been doing this creatively in business for those who are not savvy business majors to understand mergers and subsidies and how you're able to umbrella and change your name and AKAs and you still go operate. And no one will know it. And you do present as the great boogeyman. So I just wanted to say it's not that, you're looking for a person to do anything with, you're never gonna find that. Because they run the world and we support them.
That's the
Our
last thing.
mortgages, when we go shop. So maybe if we could just identify the enemy, the real enemy, they're not people, they're a corporation, and maybe we should not be supporting or buying or doing business with them on small, I don't know about your mortgages, but maybe just going to Target or where these fundings are, so we could no longer continuously spend our dollars, because we're buying war bonds without knowing it. Before it used to be sent to us or from our paychecks, if you had a job, but today these war bonds are being ciphered through our consumer purchasing, because America is a consumer nation, and because of that, it's much easier to create the idea that we're not supporting the villain, but we are. We're in pockets with them. We're laying in bed with the enemies. We're sleeping with the enemy. Did anyone watch that?
Can I respond?
It was
Yeah, sure.
great movie. Great movie. But that's the reality. And they did say, it's always in a great movie, but we are sleeping with the enemy.
There's something I want to say to that, which is that I agree in general with the idea that that corporations have a large share
Yeah.
of the evil
That
that's
we're not
happening
seeing
right
it.
now.
We're not seeing it.
If you look at the weapons contract,
Correctly. Yeah.
and we should be doing that, and this organization has done some
Yeah.
work in that direction recently. But I think that the way you laid it out is kind of like a false dichotomy, where you said, well, it's corporations, not people, so maybe we should look at the corporations, not the people, and then you said, well, maybe we shouldn't give them our money. But I think this is, to me, why Lyndon LaRouche is so important and why he's not just another person. There's this person in history. The fact that his life demonstrated, as has been discussed just here tonight, that an individual's mind can completely transform the face of world history. You think about the developments that have happened in China, and his writings in the 70s. It's quite prophetic with regard to what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in Ukraine, because he had a scientific perspective that foresaw these conflicts emerging out of the economic systems. So that idea that a human individual mind is actually capable of not just kind of changing it here and there, and it's just about that one mind can completely transform the entire course of human history. That to me is, then you also have to understand that evil people can have a large effect as well. So there's corporations, and these corporations, like, they are merging and doing these kinds of tricks, and you have NGOs and you have all this stuff, but the idea that people are the motive force of history is why we're here, right? I mean, that's why we're all in the same room, and I think it's very empowering to believe that you could actually change it. And if we just say, oh, well, it's just a bunch of corporations, maybe I shouldn't buy their bonds or whatever, or buy the invisible war bonds, like you're saying. Well, yeah, but I think the positive stance of it is that this is Jose's campaign. We've been talking about the campaign and the slogan, power not force. The power is, we have much more power than we've been accustomed to think, but it doesn't just magically appear. It's very hard to be creative, it turns out, I think. But I just wanted to say that as a response to what you were saying, because I agree with what you're saying, but I think that the solution it goes above that in a way.
You're right, Robert. You're totally right. I guess on the point, I'm back to the one you mentioned about we spend most of our lives being dead. That thought, but more so, we spend most of our lives being dead silent. Even more so. So for me personally, when I see things there, I appreciate it so much because I see that too many of us were silent, or we spend our lives not being able to advocate or be able to be agents of change. We don't know what that is. We're 9-to-5ers, or we're slaves. We're slaves or not agents of change. So because we're so burdened with just everyday life, family, kids, whatever, becoming that agent of change and emerging into that space, that is a big space. That is not everyday people. That's what they don't want. They don't want agents of change walking around. That's what was killed in Malcolm X and MLK and JFK, that legacy, that energy. They were agents of change. And we all are in our own way. That's why we're here. I
think that's the way to take them on, because yeah, do they have a lot of money and everything? Okay, they do. But their ability to have influence relies on silence and acquiescence. And if people are, know that, their influence doesn't matter if they're buying ads. If you know it's bullshit,
Exactly.
it doesn't work anymore.
Exactly. So I like that.
Unfortunately, I have to be working in St. Louis tomorrow. But I just want to say, I don't know if anyone's going to Chicago for the DNC. If anyone's going here, I would love to meet with you. But it doesn't seem like anyone's going.
Are you going?
Yeah.
We have,
wow.
we have some people in Chicago though.
Okay.
So Pam and I used to live in Chicago, and the guys we lived with still live there. So Tony and Sue, they're really good.
So Jill Stein, she's doing a thing, a rally, holding a rally there. That's what I'm going to. So I don't know, is there a connection?
No, but I got so pissed off at this Gaza bombing that the guy was collecting petitions for Jill Stein, and I said, give me that next time, to get her on the ballot.
Right.
You need somebody to go against this genocide. But Jose is your candidate right here in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't vote Jill Stein because she's not on the ballot.
I'm in New York, right?
But you can write her
Yeah.
name in, and Diane, of course. All right, so it is 7:36, and I do have a symposium at 8 o'clock that I have to be on, but I want to, first of all, actually, I should probably come up here and do it. All right, close this out. I want to thank everybody for being here. When I went into the green room, I didn't know I would come out and there'd be an even bigger audience than there was when I first left. So this is great. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, this is actually the thing that is feared the most. Because we're not just sitting around here talking about how angry we are, right? People already do that all the time everywhere. You can find rooms filled with people just like protesting, like, this needs to end, overthrow capitalism, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay, but then what do you replace it with? And then people throw out nominal words like, we need to get rid of government, we need more government, we need Marxism, we need socialism. You'll notice that most Marxists can't even agree on what Marxism is or what socialism is, or then there's like 20 different factions of it. But we were given an economic system by our founding fathers that Lyndon LaRouche developed on. And that's what we're actually doing here. We're building that here. We're discussing these ideas. This is the difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The French Revolution was just angry and a lot of heads being chopped off. But the American Revolution gave us ideas and principles and documents that we are supposed to use today. So with that, I'm going to cut us off here. I'm gonna hit the end stream button here and.